People who made a "if we're both single at 30" pact with someone. What happened when the time came? We started fake dating to get our families to stop trying to set us up with partners we didn't want. His mom kept pressuring him to date her dental hygienist's daughter, and my parents invited random men to dinner every Sunday claiming they just happened to drop by. Mason and I had made the "if we're still single" pact 21, and came up with the plan during a particularly brutal Thanksgiving, where my aunt asked if I'd considered freezing my eggs while his grandmother showed him photos of available girls from her church. Mason grabbed my hand across the table and announced we'd been dating secretly for 3 months, and the pure chaos that followed made the whole lie worth it. The arrangement had clear rules we established over beers at our regular dive bar the next night. We would only fake date at family events, no physical contact beyond hand-holding and cheek kisses, and absolutely no telling anyone else about the arrangement, especially not our friend group who would never let us live it down. None of them even knew about the pact. Mason would attend my family dinners once a month, and I would go to his mother's birthday parties and holiday gatherings, and we'd post exactly one photo together on social media per month to maintain the illusion. We practiced our story about how we realized we were perfect for each other after all these years, keeping the details vague enough that we wouldn't contradict ourselves later. The first few events went surprisingly smoothly as we already knew everything about each other, from how we took our coffee to our most embarrassing childhood stories, which made us incredibly convincing as a couple who'd been friends first. For 6 months, the system worked flawlessly, and our families were thrilled beyond reason. His mother stopped mentioning the dental hygienist's daughter, and my parents canceled their weekly dinner ambushes, finally believing I'd found someone worthy of their previous investment in my college education. We got comfortable with the routine of showing up together, holding hands during grace, and deflecting questions about when we were moving in together with vague comments about taking things slow. Mason would bring me coffee during the drives to family events, always remembering my complicated order without asking, and I would prep him on whatever family drama he needed to navigate that particular day. We developed inside jokes about our fake relationship, referring to each other as Snookums and Honey Bunny, in increasingly ridiculous ways that made us both crack up. Our friends noticed we were spending more time together, but assumed we were just being codependent as usual, which technically wasn't wrong. Then came my sister's wedding, where everything I thought I understood completely shattered. The ceremony was outdoors in October, and I hadn't brought a jacket because I'm an idiot who prioritizes fashion over comfort every single time. Mason noticed me shivering during the vows and wrapped his suit jacket around my shoulders without me asking, then pulled me against his side and kept his arm around me for warmth. During the reception, my drunk uncle started his annual tradition of telling everyone what was wrong with their life choices, and when he got to me, he said, "At least this one finally stopped being so picky, though God knows how long before she screws this up too." Mason stood up so fast his chair tipped backward, looked my uncle dead in the eyes and said, "With all due respect, sir, any man would be lucky to have even 5 minutes of her time, and I wake up every day still in complete disbelief that she chooses to spend her life with me." The entire tent went silent, and my uncle slunk back to the bar, while Mason sat down and casually resumed eating his salmon like he hadn't just defended me fiercer than anyone ever had in my entire life. Later, during the slow songs, he pulled me onto the dance floor even though we'd specifically agreed dancing was too intimate for our arrangement. But his grandmother was watching, and we needed to sell it, so I let him lead me through a simple sway while the wedding singer crooned about forever. He whispered jokes in my ear about the bride's cousins doing the electric slide wrong, and I buried my face in his shoulder to muffle my laughter, and suddenly we weren't pretending anymore. At least I wasn't. The way he held me like I was something precious, the way he knew exactly when to spin me to make me laugh, the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching, made my chest physically ache with wanting this to be real. My cousin caught the bouquet and shoved it in my hands, saying I was next, and Mason caught the garter and slid it up my leg while everyone cheered, his fingers trembling against my skin. Walking to the car afterward, both of us slightly drunk on champagne and wedding atmosphere, I couldn't stop myself from blurting out, "Mason, I think I'm falling in love with you for real, and I don't know how to stop it." He froze with his car keys halfway to the lock, turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before, and said, "Leah, there's something I need to tell you about why I really agreed to this whole fake dating thing." His keys slipped from his fingers and clattered on the asphalt while he turned to face me completely. The October wind cut through my dress and made me shiver harder than before. His face did this weird thing where his mouth tried to smile, but his eyes looked scared. "I've been in love with you since we were 23, but I also took a job interview in Seattle last month." My brain literally stopped working, and I just stood there staring at him. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, and some drunk wedding guests stumbled past us laughing. Mason bent down to grab his keys with shaking hands and looked back up at me. "We should sit in the car because we're both kind of drunk and it's freezing out here." I followed him to his Honda and climbed into the passenger seat where I'd sat 1,000 times before. The familiar smell of his pine air freshener mixed with the champagne on our breath. He started the engine and cranked the heat up while I wrapped my arms around myself. Mason gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead at the empty parking lot. He told me he agreed to fake date partly to have more time with me before potentially moving. He also couldn't watch me date anyone else anymore after watching me go through 3 bad relationships in the past 2 years. The job offer came through yesterday, and he had 2 weeks to decide whether to take it or not. I finally found my voice and asked why he never said anything for 7 whole years if he felt this way. He made this broken laugh sound that hurt to hear. He explained that after we made our pact at 21, I made it super clear we were just friends. I'd told him multiple times how glad I was to have a friend who didn't want to date me. He'd rather have me as a friend than risk losing me completely by confessing his feelings. We sat there in complete silence while the heat finally started working and my teeth stopped chattering. The radio played some old song we used to sing together on road trips. I asked what happens now, and my voice came out smaller than I meant it to. Mason said he didn't know, but he couldn't let me think this was one-sided when I was brave enough to tell him the truth. His hands kept fidgeting with his keys, and I noticed he still wore the friendship bracelet I made him 5 years ago. We both agreed we were too drunk and emotional to figure this out tonight in a wedding parking lot. Mason put the car in drive and we rode home in complete silence except for the GPS telling him where to turn. The streetlights passed by in blurs and I pressed my forehead against the cold window. When we pulled up to my apartment building, he put the car in the park but kept the engine running. Before I got out, he grabbed my hand and squeezed it gently. "We'll talk tomorrow when we're both sober and can think straight." I nodded and stumbled out of the car, then watched his taillights disappear around the corner. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my heels and collapsed on my bed, still wearing my bridesmaid dress. I didn't sleep at all and just replayed every single moment of our friendship, looking for signs I'd missed. That time he canceled a date to help me move furniture suddenly meant something different. The way he always remembered my birthday and got me thoughtful gifts instead of generic ones. How he never liked any of my boyfriends and always found something wrong with them. By morning, I had typed and deleted 37 different texts to Mason. My eyes were puffy from crying and my dress was wrinkled beyond saving. At noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Mason asking if we could meet at our regular dive bar at 2. I spent 3 hours getting ready, then changing outfits because nothing felt right for this conversation. My black dress seemed too formal, jeans felt too casual, and everything else looked wrong. I finally settled on jeans and his old college hoodie I'd stolen years ago. The bar was mostly empty when I walked in since it was Sunday afternoon. Mason was already sitting in our usual booth in the back corner, wearing the flannel shirt I'd bought him last Christmas. We both ordered water instead of our usual beers, which made the bartender joke about us being lightweights. Neither of us laughed because we were both too tense to find anything funny right now. Mason started by apologizing for the timing of everything and how he'd handled it. I told him to just be completely honest about everything, because I needed to understand. He explained the Seattle job was a huge promotion he wasn't even looking for. A recruiter had reached out to him about heading up their entire West Coast division. Why did Mason wait until she confessed her feelings to mention both the love thing and the Seattle job? That timing seems oddly convenient. The way he's been carrying this torch for 7 years but suddenly has this huge job offer, right? When their fake dating gets complicated makes me wonder what else he hasn't mentioned. The interview happened a month before we started our fake dating arrangement. When we came up with the fake dating plan, he thought maybe it would help him get over me before leaving. Instead, it made everything 100 times worse because he got to pretend we were real. Every time he tried to date someone else over the past year, he said he kept comparing them to me and finding them lacking. The Seattle job seemed like the perfect escape from watching me eventually end up with someone else, except now playing my boyfriend made everything 10 times worse. Because he got to know what it felt like to hold my hand in public and have me lean into him during movies and introduce him as mine. He was completely torn between taking this huge career opportunity and staying here for something that might not even be real. And the worst part was, he kept looking at me like he was trying to memorize my face. He thought maybe I was just caught up in the wedding atmosphere and the champagne and the slow dancing, and tomorrow I'd wake up and realize I didn't actually want him that way. I grabbed his shoulders and made him look at me while I told him about the exact moment he stood up to my uncle. That wasn't fake to me, not even a little bit. And neither was the way he always remembered my coffee order, or how he texted me stupid memes at 2 in the morning when he couldn't sleep, or how he drove 40 minutes out of his way to bring me soup when I had the flu last month. These feelings had been building for months, maybe years if I was being honest, not just tonight with the fairy lights and the wedding cake. The fact that he was planning to move to Seattle without telling me how he felt made me so mad I actually shoved him. Not hard, but enough to make my point. He caught my wrists and pulled me closer, and we just stood there in the parking lot staring at each other like complete idiots. We'd created this whole elaborate lie for our families while lying to ourselves about what we actually felt, and the irony was so ridiculous that I started laughing first. Mason cracked up too, and soon we were both bent over wheezing about how we'd accidentally catfished ourselves into real feelings while fake dating. The tension broke enough that we could actually talk without me wanting to either kiss him or punch him. He asked what I wanted him to do about Seattle, his voice all serious again. I stepped back and told him that wasn't fair to put on me because he needed to decide what he wanted for his career without factoring in my feelings. Starting something real with that kind of pressure hanging over us would doom us from the start, and we both knew it. We stood there by his car for another 20 minutes going back and forth until we finally agreed to take a week to think separately. He would look at the Seattle job based only on whether it was right for his career, and I would figure out if my feelings were real or just convenient, because he was already there being perfect. We also agreed to keep up the fake dating appearance for now because trying to explain this mess to our families while we sorted it out would be completely impossible. The drive home was quiet, except for the radio, and when he dropped me off, he kissed my forehead and said he'd see me at my parents' dinner on Sunday. 3 days later, Sunday dinner at my parents' house was absolute torture. Mom kept gushing about how perfect Mason and I were together, how she'd always known we'd end up together, how she was already looking at venues for next summer. Mason sat next to me at the table, close enough that our knees touched, but we could barely look at each other without remembering everything we'd said in that parking lot. Dad asked Mason about work, and he gave some vague answer about considering new opportunities without mentioning Seattle, which made my chest tight. My sister kept making faces at me from across the table because she could tell something was weird, but I just focused on cutting my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. We left as soon as we could politely manage, claiming Mason had an early meeting, and the goodbye hug in front of my parents felt like acting in the world's most awkward play. 2 more days passed with nothing but a few basic texts about logistics before I completely broke down and called Christina Reed. She was my friend from college who lived about an hour away and didn't know any of our families, which made her perfect for this disaster. She showed up at my apartment with 2 bottles of wine and those expensive chocolates from the place downtown, and I told her absolutely everything. The pact we'd made at 21, the fake dating arrangement, the wedding, the parking lot confession, Seattle, all of it poured out while she sat on my couch drinking straight from the bottle. She listened to the whole ridiculous story without interrupting once, then looked me dead in the eyes and called me an idiot in the most loving way possible. According to her, Mason and I had basically been dating for real this entire time. We just called it fake to protect ourselves from the possibility of rejection. All those family dinners and hand-holding and inside jokes were exactly what actual couples did, minus the physical stuff. And even that had been slowly increasing with the cheek kisses and the dancing and the way we always ended up pressed together on the couch during movie nights. She pointed out that we'd literally been each other's primary person for years, and the fake dating thing was just an excuse to make it official without risking our friendship. She stayed until midnight helping me process everything, and when she left, she hugged me and told me not to let him go to Seattle without telling him the truth. Meanwhile, Mason was apparently having the exact same breakdown with Dennis Hansen from work. Dennis told him later that he'd never seen Mason talk about anyone the way he talked about me, like I was the sun and he was just lucky to be in orbit. 4 days into our thinking week, everything exploded when Judith Pearson, who went to church with Mason's mom, posted on Facebook about seeing us looking so in love at my sister's wedding. She wrote this whole long thing about young love and soulmates and then added something about engagement vibes and how she couldn't wait for the announcement. My phone immediately started buzzing with texts from aunts and cousins and my mom's book club friends, all asking when Mason was proposing and had we picked a date and did I want great-grandma's ring. My mom's ringtone cut through the chaos 43 minutes later, while I was still trying to respond to the flood of messages. I stared at her contact photo for 3 rings before answering, because I knew exactly what was coming. She launched into rapid-fire questions about why I hadn't told her about the engagement and when did Mason propose and had we set a date yet. I stammered through an explanation that Judith must have misunderstood something at the church event, and we definitely weren't engaged yet. Mom made this disappointed humming sound, but then immediately perked up and said she'd start looking at venues anyway just to be prepared. Before I could protest, she hung up to call her sister about dress shopping. My phone dinged with a text from Mason that just said, "I'm so sorry about Judith," and my chest got tight seeing his name on my screen. We hadn't texted since our conversation in his car 5 days ago when everything fell apart. I typed back, "We're idiots," and hit send before I could overthink it. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again before his reply came through saying, "The biggest idiots." That tiny exchange felt like a crack forming in the wall between us, even though it changed nothing about our situation. I spent the rest of Sunday getting venue links from Mom every 20 minutes while trying to focus on work emails. Mason's grandmother called Monday morning while I was making coffee, and her voice had that formal tone that meant trouble. She invited us to a church luncheon that weekend to properly introduce us to the whole congregation as a couple. The way she said it made clear this wasn't really optional unless we wanted to explain why we couldn't attend together. I agreed because what else could I do without raising suspicions about our relationship status? She gave me all the details about dress code and arrival time, and mentioned how excited everyone was to meet me properly. After hanging up, I stared at my phone for 10 minutes before texting Mason about the luncheon. He replied asking if I was okay with going, and I could practically hear the concern in those 5 words. I told him yes, because even though everything was complicated and messy, I missed him after only 5 days apart. He sent back a thumbs up emoji, which was so unlike him that I actually smiled at my phone. The week crawled by with more venue links from Mom and careful texts with Mason about luncheon logistics. Friday night, he called to discuss our game plan for handling his grandmother's friends and their questions. We were supposed to strategize for maybe 30 minutes, but somehow 3 hours passed while we talked about everything except the luncheon. He told me about the Seattle job offer and how they wanted someone who could relocate within 6 weeks. The position involved leading their entire West Coast expansion, and the salary was almost double what he made now. I told him about my conversation with Christina at work and how she'd noticed I seemed different lately. Neither of us mentioned the elephant in the room about what would happen with us if he took the job. Saturday morning arrived too fast, and I changed outfits 4 times before settling on the navy dress his grandmother had complimented once. Mason picked me up and we drove to the church in mostly silence except for the radio playing quietly. The luncheon was in the basement fellowship hall with round tables covered in white tablecloths and centerpieces of fake flowers. Mason's grandmother calling with that formal tone for a church luncheon? That timing feels way too convenient. Almost like someone's orchestrating things behind the scenes to push them together. What's really going on with all these family members suddenly ramping up the pressure right when they're trying to figure things out? His grandmother swooped in immediately to parade us around to different groups of church ladies who all wanted to know our story. We stuck to our practiced version while holding hands and smiling until my face hurt from the effort. Judith appeared while Mason was trapped in a conversation with the prayer circle about mission work in Guatemala. She cornered me by the dessert table and started asking about ring shopping with this knowing look on her face. I dodged her questions badly by saying we were taking things slow and focusing on our relationship first. She patted my arm and said, "Young love shouldn't wait too long because life was short and unpredictable." Her eyes had this gleam that made me want to scream because she clearly thought she knew some secret. The formal lunch started with a prayer that went on for 5 minutes while everyone held hands around their tables. Mason sat next to me and I could feel the tension radiating from his body as his grandmother introduced us to the whole room. Everyone clapped and someone shouted congratulations, which made my stomach twist into knots. During the meal, while his grandmother was busy talking to the pastor's wife, Mason reached for my hand under the table. It wasn't for show since no one could see beneath the tablecloth, and I knew he needed comfort as much as I did. I squeezed back and we held on like we were drowning while eating dry chicken and green beans with our free hands. The luncheon felt endless with more congratulations and questions about our future, while we kept smiling and lying. Mason's jaw was clenched so tight I worried he'd crack a tooth before we finally escaped 2 hours later. In the car, he started driving but suddenly pulled over in a drugstore parking lot 3 blocks from the church. He turned to me with this desperate look and said he couldn't do this anymore and needed to know what I was thinking. I took a shaky breath and told him I knew my feelings were real, but I was scared of ruining our friendship if we tried and failed. He stared at the steering wheel for a long moment before saying, "Our friendship was already ruined because we couldn't pretend these feelings didn't exist." His voice cracked when he said we could either try for real or spend our whole lives wondering what if. Before I could respond, his phone rang with the Seattle company's ringtone he'd set specifically for them. He answered on speaker, and they said they needed his decision by Monday morning because they had other candidates waiting. The deadline was 3 days away, and hearing it out loud made everything feel urgent and impossible at the same time. After he hung up, we sat in silence for 5 minutes before I said we needed to tell our families the truth separately. Whatever happened with us or Seattle, the fake dating lie had to end because it was making everything worse. Mason nodded and started driving again while we made a plan to talk to our families before Monday, so he could make his decision with a clear head. Saturday morning, I drove to my sister's apartment first, because she was always the easiest to talk to about hard stuff. She opened the door in her pajamas holding coffee and knew something was wrong before I even said anything. I sat on her couch and told her everything about the fake dating arrangement while she listened without interrupting once. Her face went through about 12 different emotions as I explained the pact from college and how we'd been lying to everyone for months. She set down her mug really carefully and said she was hurt. I didn't trust her with the truth, but admitted she'd suspected something felt off at the wedding. When I told her Mason and I had real feelings now, she actually smiled and said she'd help me tell our parents and would handle our uncle if he started being an ass about it. Meanwhile, Mason was at Dennis's place doing the same thing because he needed practice before facing his mom. Dennis apparently just laughed when Mason explained the whole fake dating scheme and said he'd wondered why they suddenly seemed so coupley after years of being just friends. He offered to go with Mason when he told his mom, which Mason texted me later, made him feel way less alone about the whole mess. Sunday morning came too fast, and I sat my parents down at their kitchen table, where we'd had every serious conversation since I was 12. I started from the beginning with the pact we'd made at 21, and watched Dad's eyebrows climb higher with each detail. When I got to the part about announcing our fake relationship at Thanksgiving, Mom's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Dad actually looked kind of impressed by how committed we'd been to the lie, but Mom's face went completely blank, which was never good. She didn't yell or throw anything, which was somehow worse than if she had. She just set down her cup and said she was disappointed I couldn't be honest with her about my life. Then she stood up and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there feeling like I was 5 years old again. Dad patted my shoulder and told me to give her time to process everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Mason saying his mom had taken it badly too. She kept asking why they would lie to everyone who loved them and couldn't understand how he could look her in the eye every Sunday dinner, knowing it was all fake. His grandmother apparently just nodded and said she knew something was off and she'd been praying for them both. That night I couldn't sleep and kept replaying Mom's disappointed face in my head. Without really planning to, I grabbed my keys and drove to Mason's apartment at 2 in the morning. He opened the door before I even knocked, looking as wrecked as I felt with dark circles under his eyes. We didn't say anything, just held each other in his doorway for what felt like forever. We stayed up the rest of the night sitting on his couch talking about everything we'd been too scared to say before. Our fears about ruining our friendship and what Seattle meant, and whether our families would ever forgive us for lying. By the time the sun came up, we'd decided that whatever happened with his job or our families, we wanted to try being together for real. Monday morning, Mason called the Seattle office and asked for 1 more week to make his decision, explaining he had a family situation to resolve. They agreed, which gave us 7 days to figure out if we could make long-distance work or if one of us needed to make a big change. We spent those next few days together as a real couple for the first time, without any family watching or judging. We went to the movies and held hands without it being for show, and had dinner at restaurants where we didn't have to perform for anyone. It was awkward and wonderful and scary all at once, and we kept laughing at how we were basically starting at the beginning after pretending to be together for months. Wednesday, I brought Mason to meet Christina properly as my actual boyfriend, not just my fake one. She grilled him about his intentions for 20 minutes while I wanted to crawl under the table and die. But afterward, when he was in the bathroom, she pulled me aside and said we were perfect for each other and always had been. A week later, Mason called me while I was making dinner and said the words that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. The Seattle company offered him the position with a start date in 6 weeks, and he'd already accepted it because the salary was too good to pass up. I burned the chicken while he explained how he'd negotiated to work remotely 1 week every month so we could see each other regularly. We spent the next 3 hours on the phone making lists of how to handle long distance, when we'd visit, and which airline had the best deals on monthly flights. The hardest part was deciding to tell our families the truth about everything before he left, because trying to maintain any kind of lie from across the country would be impossible. We picked a neutral restaurant downtown and invited both sets of parents, plus his brother Dennis and my sister, for dinner the following Saturday. Mason held my hand under the table while we explained that yes, we were really dating now, but no, we hadn't been dating for the past 7 months like we'd told them. My dad's face went through about 12 different expressions, while my mom just sat there completely silent silent, which was somehow worse than yelling would have been. Dennis actually laughed and said he knew something was weird when we'd shown up to Thanksgiving holding hands like robots. Mason's mom looked like we'd personally betrayed her, which I guess we kind of had, while his dad just kept asking clarifying questions about the timeline. My sister was the angriest, not about the lying, but because she'd spent months planning double dates we'd kept dodging. The waiter kept trying to take our order while this whole mess unfolded and finally just left water pitchers on the table and disappeared. Mason explained about the pact we'd made at 21 and how the fake dating started as a way to get everyone to stop the setups. His mom interrupted to say she only wanted him to be happy, and the dental hygienist's daughter wasn't even that nice anyway. My mom finally spoke up to say she felt manipulated and didn't understand why we couldn't just tell them we didn't want to be set up. The conversation went in circles for another hour, with everyone processing the deception at different speeds. When we finally ordered food, nobody really ate much except Dennis, who said drama made him hungry. Over the next week, my mom gave me the silent treatment, which kind of peaceful until she showed up at my apartment with coffee and said she understood why we felt so pressured. She admitted she'd been too pushy about my love life and promised to back off on the marriage timeline, though we both knew that would last maybe 2 months. Mason's mom took longer to come around and kept making passive-aggressive comments about trust, until Dennis's wife pulled her aside at Sunday dinner. There's something oddly convenient about Mason's mom admitting the dental hygienist's daughter wasn't that nice anyway. Makes me wonder if she knew all along these setups weren't great matches, but kept pushing them anyway for her own reasons. She told her how her own parents had pushed her into her first marriage at 22, and how much she wished she'd had the courage to push back like we had. After that, his mom started softening, especially when she saw how Mason looked at me now that we were actually together. The gossip situation was a complete nightmare because Judith had already told everyone at their church about our engagement that didn't exist. We had to keep correcting the story, which led to even more confusion, with some people thinking we'd broken up and gotten back together. Others assumed we were covering up some huge fight, and one of Mason's cousins started a rumor that I was pregnant, which explained the quick engagement that again didn't actually exist. Every family event became an exercise in damage control, with both of us giving slightly different versions of the real story because we couldn't keep the details straight. 5 weeks after the restaurant confession, I was sitting on Mason's bedroom floor surrounded by cardboard boxes and packing tape. We folded his clothes while alternating between crying about him leaving and laughing about how we'd gotten ourselves into this whole situation. He showed me his flight confirmation for 3 weeks after his start date, and I showed him mine for the week after that. His apartment was basically empty, except for the furniture he was selling and the boxes shipping to Seattle. The morning of his flight, I drove him to the airport at 5 a.m. because neither of us could sleep anyway. The check-in line was endless, and we just stood there holding each other while business travelers gave us weird looks. At security, he kissed me in front of everyone and said he'd loved me for 7 years, so a few hundred miles meant nothing. I completely lost it, and ugly cried right there, while TSA agents pretended not to notice, and strangers actively avoided eye contact. The drive home was brutal, and I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through the tears. 2 months into long distance, we'd developed a routine of nightly video calls and sending each other stupid photos throughout the day. Mason sent me a care package with Seattle coffee, and I sent him cookies from his favorite bakery that arrived completely crushed. We counted days between visits like kids counting to Christmas, and had a shared calendar with all our flights highlighted in different colors. Our families had mostly accepted our relationship, though comments about the lying still popped up at every gathering. My mom kept mentioning how nice Seattle was this time of year, and Mason's mom started sentences with, "when you move there," like it was already decided. The truth was, we were planning for me to possibly move next year if things kept working, but that conversation terrified me as much as it excited me. Some nights the distance felt impossible, and other nights we'd fall asleep on video call and wake up to dead phone batteries. But we were making it work, really work, not fake work, and that made every mile worth it. Well folks, that's all for today's story time. Thanks for letting me wonder about things with you. It's always a good ride. Until we meet again, stay curious, and subscribe for more content like this.